Somewhere inside a Google server room, a machine just did something no human being has ever done. It looked at a string of letters, nothing more than a chemical code, and in minutes it predicted the exact three-dimensional shape of a protein, a problem that stumped scientists for 50 years, a problem some researchers spent their entire careers chasing and never solved. Gone, solved, in minutes. And here's the part that should stop you cold. This technology didn't start in a biology lab. It started as a video game. An AI built to master a 2,000-year-old board game grew up to reshape modern medicine, win a Nobel Prize, and hand humanity a map to nearly every protein on Earth for free. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how that happened and why the cure your doctor is researching right now might already be sitting inside a database this AI built. Let's rewind. Long before a Nobel Prize, long before saving lives, this story starts somewhere much smaller. London, 2010, a tiny startup with a strange, almost arrogant mission statement. Solve intelligence, then use that to solve everything else. That's it. That's the whole plan. Solve intelligence itself, and let it solve the rest of humanity's problems for you. The company was called DeepMind, and at the time, almost nobody had heard of it. Now here's the question that matters. If you wanted to build something that actually thinks, where would you start? So the DeepMind team did something clever. They turned to games. Think about it for a second. A game has clear rules, a clear goal, and a clear way to measure success. You either win or you lose. If a machine can learn to make good decisions inside a game, under pressure, that's proof it can learn to make good decisions anywhere. Games became the training ground for a mind. First came Atari. The DeepMind system learned to play dozens of classic video games just from watching the pixels on the screen, the same way you would. No instructions, no rulebook. Just trial, error, and improvement. It was impressive, but it was just a warm-up. Because there was one game left, considered by many the ultimate test of human intuition. A game so complex, so drenched in feel and instinct, that experts believed a computer could never truly master it. That game was Go. If you don't know it, Go is an ancient board game, over 2,000 years old, born in China. Two players place black and white stones on a grid, trying to surround territory. The rules fit on a napkin. A child can learn them in 10 minutes. But here's the twist. The number of possible positions on a Go board is larger than the number of atoms in the observable universe. Chess is a math problem. Go is closer to art. Professional players talk about feeling the right move. They can't always explain why a move is good, they just know. So how do you teach a machine to feel? DeepMind built a system called AlphaGo, and they trained it in 2 stages. First, it studied. It watched thousands of games played by strong human amateurs, learning the patterns, the shapes, the instincts of the game. Then it did something no student ever gets to do. It played itself. Over and over, millions of games against its own past versions, refining its knowledge every single time, discovering strategies no textbook had ever written down. In October 2015, in a quiet, closed-door match, AlphaGo faced Fan Hui, the reigning European champion. AlphaGo won, 5-0. It was the first time an AI had ever beaten a professional Go player on a full-size board without a handicap, and almost nobody outside the field noticed. That was about to change, because the real test was coming. In March 2016, AlphaGo was set to face Lee Sedol in Seoul, South Korea. Lee Sedol wasn't just good, he was one of the greatest Go players who had ever lived, a living legend. 18 international titles. And before the match, he was confident. He predicted he would win 5-0, or at worst 4-1 in his favor. The world was watching. Over 200 million people tuned in. Game 1, AlphaGo won. The room went quiet. Commentators didn't know what to say. Then came Game 2, and this is the moment that changed everything. On move 37, AlphaGo played something strange, something that looked, frankly, like a mistake. A move so unusual that one commentator said live on air, "That's a very strange move." Human experts were confused. Some assumed it was an error. It wasn't. That move ended up shaping the entire rest of the game, and Lee Sedol, the greatest player of his generation, was forced to leave the room to collect himself. He needed fresh air. A machine had just played something creative enough to shake a legend. Go players around the world still study that single move today. They call it simply Move 37. AlphaGo went on to win the match, 4-1. Lee Sedol later said something that stuck with a lot of people. He said AlphaGo made him question things he had believed about the game for his entire life. Think about that for a second. A machine didn't just calculate better than a human. It showed creativity that a human master had never even considered. So what do you do after you've already beaten the best human alive? You go further. In 2017, DeepMind released AlphaGo Zero, and this version didn't study a single human game, not one. It only knew the rules, nothing else. It learned everything, every strategy, every instinct, purely by playing against itself, from complete scratch. Within 3 days, AlphaGo Zero surpassed the version that beat Lee Sedol. Days, not years, days. Then came Alpha Zero, a more general version of the same idea, and within hours of self-play, it mastered chess and the Japanese game shogi too, beating the strongest existing programs in each one. One system, 3 different games, no human guidance required. At this point, DeepMind had proven something enormous. Machines could develop real strategic creativity entirely on their own, faster than any human civilization ever could. But here's the question that should be forming in your head right now. If a machine can teach itself to master a 2,000-year-old game in days, what happens when you point that same kind of mind on something that actually matters? Not a board, not stones, something like disease, something like the code of life itself. That pivot is exactly what happened next, and it's the reason this story ends with a Nobel Prize instead of just a trophy. Before we get there, if this is blowing your mind a little, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stick around because we post content like this every single day. Now, let's go back to where this story really turns, because behind AlphaGo, there was one person pulling the strings, a former chess prodigy who once designed video games for a living. And what he built next didn't just win a game, it rewrote biology. To understand why any of this happened, you need to meet the man behind it. His name is Demis Hassabis, and his story doesn't start in a lab. It starts on a chessboard. Hassabis was born in London in 1976, and by the age of 4, he was already beating his own father at chess. By 13, he was ranked one of the best chess players in the world for his age, a certified master, sitting across the board from adults 3 times his age and beating them too. Chess, if you think about it, is just a system. Rules, patterns, consequences. And Hassabis had a rare gift for seeing inside systems, for understanding the hidden structure behind complicated things. But here's what makes his story different from a typical prodigy tale. He didn't become a professional chess player. He became a video game designer. At just 17 years old, Hassabis co-designed and programmed a game called Theme Park, where players built and ran their own amusement park. It became a massive commercial hit, selling millions of copies worldwide. Think about that for a second. A teenager building a simulated world where every choice the player made had visible, logical consequences. It's almost a rehearsal for everything he'd do later in life. He worked at Bullfrog Productions, one of the most respected studios of that era, learning directly from legendary designer Peter Molyneux, then went on to found his own studio, Elixir Studios. By all measures, he could have had a long, successful career simply making video games. Instead, he went back to school. Hassabis studied computer science at Cambridge, graduating with the top result in his class. Then he did something that tells you exactly how his mind works. He pursued a PhD in cognitive neuroscience at University College London, studying the human brain itself, specifically memory and how we imagine the future. One of his most cited research papers looked at patients with amnesia, people who had lost the ability to form new memories, and found something remarkable. Those same patients also struggled to imagine future events vividly in their mind's eye. The conclusion was striking. Memory and imagination aren't separate systems in the brain. They share the same machinery. To picture tomorrow, your brain borrows tools it built for remembering yesterday. Hold on to that idea for a moment, because it matters more than it sounds like it should. Here's why that detail matters so much. Building games taught him how to construct intelligent systems from the outside. Studying the brain taught him how intelligence actually works from the inside. Two sides of the exact same question, chasing him his whole life. What is a mind, and can we build one? In 2010, Hassabis co-founded DeepMind alongside Shane Legg and Mustafa Suleyman. The name itself was a kind of promise, fusing deep learning, the technique, with mind, the goal. And that mission statement we mentioned earlier, solve intelligence, then use it to solve everything else. It sounded closer to science fiction than a business plan. Investors were skeptical. Most of the outside world simply ignored it. In 2014, Google acquired DeepMind in a deal reportedly worth around $500 million, and almost overnight, this quiet London research lab became one of the most important artificial intelligence groups on the planet. You already know what happened next. Atari, then AlphaGo, then AlphaGo Zero, then AlphaZero. Game after game falling to a mind built from nothing but math and self-play. But here's the thing about Hassabis that separates him from most people building AI today. Games were never the point. Games were the proof. He needed to demonstrate beyond any doubt that this approach, deep learning combined with reinforcement learning, could produce genuine strategic intelligence, something that could plan, adapt, and even surprise experts the way Move 37 did. Once that was proven on the world stage in front of 200 million viewers, Hassabis turned to his team and asked a very different kind of question. If this system can master a 2,000-year-old game humans have played for centuries, what's the hardest, most important, most stubborn problem in all of science? Not a game with an audience, a real problem with real consequences that had defeated brilliant scientists for half a century. They didn't have to look far. Biologists had been staring at the same wall since the 1960s, a question so difficult, so fundamental to understanding life itself, that some researchers considered it borderline insoluble within a single human lifetime. It's called the protein folding problem. Notice something interesting here. In chess, you're reading patterns on 64 squares. In Go, patterns across a grid of stones. A protein is, in its own way, a pattern. A sequence that folds into a shape, and that shape determines almost everything about how your body functions. Different board, same fundamental skill, reading pattern and predicting shape. That's exactly what caught Hassabis's attention. And if you're thinking that sounds complicated and boring, stay with me, because this is the part of the story where a game-playing AI turns into something that could save your life, or the life of someone you love. Every disease you've ever heard of, Alzheimer's, cancer, Parkinson's, cystic fibrosis, even the common cold. All of them come down to some way to the shape of a protein. Get that shape wrong or fail to understand it, and medicine is basically working blind. Get it right, and you can design a drug, a vaccine, or a cure with surgical precision. For 50 years, that shape was one of the best-kept secrets in all of biology. Hassabis and his team were about to crack it wide open. And what happened next didn't just win them a scientific prize, it earned Demis Hassabis a seat next to some of the greatest scientific minds in human history, and a Nobel Prize with his name permanently attached to it. But before we get to the prize, you need to understand the problem they actually solved, because once you see it, you'll never look at your own body the same way again. Okay, let's slow down for a second, because this next part is the actual heart of the whole story. What exactly is a protein, and why would solving its shape be worth a Nobel Prize? Here's the simplest way to think about it. Your body is basically a factory, running trillions of tiny machines every single second. Those machines are proteins. They digest your food, they fight off infections, they carry oxygen in your blood, they fire the signals that let you read these words right now. A protein starts out as a long chain made of building blocks called amino acids, strung together like beads on a string in a specific order written by your DNA. But a flat chain of beads can't do any actual work. Not yet. So that chain folds, it twists and crumples itself in a fraction of a second into a very specific, very particular three-dimensional shape. And here's the part that changes everything. That shape is the machine. Shape is function. Think of it like a key. A key is just a flat piece of metal until it's cut into the right shape. Cut it correctly and it opens a very specific lock. Cut it wrong, even slightly wrong, and it opens nothing at all. Proteins work exactly the same way. The folded shape determines exactly what that protein can grab onto, block, build, or destroy inside your body. Get the shape right, and a protein can identify a virus and destroy it. Get the shape wrong, even by a tiny amount, and you get diseases. Alzheimer's is linked to proteins that misfold and clump together in the brain. Cystic fibrosis comes from a single misfolded protein that can't do its job. So scientists desperately needed to know these shapes, not roughly, exactly, down to the position of individual atoms. And this is where things get almost absurd. In the 1960s, a scientist named Cyrus Levinthal did the math on how many possible ways a single small protein chain could theoretically fold. The number was so large that if a protein tried every single possible shape, one after another at incredible speed, it would take longer than the current age of the universe to find the correct one. Read that again, longer than the age of the universe. And yet, inside your body, right now, proteins are folding correctly in milliseconds, every second, billions of times over. Nature solved this instantly. Scientists could not solve it computationally for over 50 years. That gap became known as the protein folding problem, one of the biggest open questions in all of biology. So how did scientists find these shapes before AlphaFold came along? Painfully, that's the honest answer. Researchers used techniques like X-ray crystallography and cryo-electron microscopy, physically capturing images of a protein's structure, atom by atom. It's brilliant science. It's also incredibly slow. A single protein structure could take a scientist years to determine, sometimes an entire PhD thesis dedicated to solving the shape of just one protein. Some structures cost hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars in lab work to nail down. Here's some real perspective on the scale of the problem. The very first protein structure was decoded back in 1958 by a scientist named John Kendrew, studying a protein called myoglobin. It took him years. By the time AlphaFold showed up, more than 60 decades later, humanity had painstakingly mapped roughly 200,000 protein structures in total. Sounds like a lot, right? Here's the problem. There are over 200 million known proteins in nature. Do the math. After 60 years of dedicated, brilliant, careful science, we had mapped roughly 1/10 of 1% of what was out there. The other 99.9% was functionally a black box. Now, to keep everyone honest and to make sure nobody could fake progress, biologists created a global competition in 1994 called CASP, the Critical Assessment of Structure Prediction. Every 2 years, scientists are given amino acid sequences for proteins whose real physical shape has already been measured in a lab but kept secret. Teams around the world try to predict the shape computationally before the answer is revealed. It's the closest thing biology has to an Olympic event. And for over 2 decades, no computer program came close to matching real experimental accuracy. Then, in 2018, AlphaFold entered CASP 13. It won by a wide margin. The scientific community sat up and paid attention. But Hassabis and his team weren't satisfied with the best so far. They rebuilt the entire system from scratch, feeding it far more biological and evolutionary data, and entered CASP 14 in 2020. What happened next is one of those rare moments where an entire scientific field changes overnight. AlphaFold's predictions were, on average, accurate to within the width of an atom, indistinguishable in most cases from the results of years of painstaking lab work. John Wolt, the scientist who co-founded CASP nearly 30 decades ago, said publicly that this was a problem he thought he might never see solved in his lifetime. 50 years, solved essentially in one event. Not partially better, not promising progress, solved to the point where biologists could trust the predictions enough to build real research on top of them. Take a moment and actually sit with that. A problem that outlived entire scientific careers, a problem some researchers spent their whole professional lives chasing without ever reaching the finish line. A machine that started out learning to stack sandcastles in Atari and beat a legend at an ancient board game had just cracked open one of biology's oldest locked doors. And here's where the story could have gone in one of two very different directions. DeepMind could have patented it, licensed it, charged pharmaceutical giants millions of dollars for access, and made an absolute fortune. That is not what happened. What Hassabis did next is honestly the part of the story that made me want to make this video in the first place. Here's what Hassabis and his team actually did with a discovery that could have made them unimaginably wealthy. They gave it away. Not a watered-down demo version, not a limited trial, the real thing. In partnership with the European Bioinformatics Institute, part of the European Molecular Biology Laboratory, DeepMind launched something called the AlphaFold Protein Structure Database in the summer of 2021. Free, open, no login wall, no license fee, no fine print. At launch, it held predicted structures for around 350,000 proteins, including nearly the entire set of proteins found in the human body. But they weren't finished. Just 1 year later, in 2022, that number exploded to over 200 million predicted protein structures, covering nearly every organism on Earth that scientists have ever sequenced. Sit with that number for a second. 200 million. Remember what we said earlier? After 60 years of experimental work, humanity had physically mapped around 200,000 protein structures. DeepMind didn't just add to that number, they multiplied it by roughly 1,000 and then handed the entire thing to the public, for free, almost overnight. There's an old story about the scientist who developed the polio vaccine, and when asked who owned the patent, he reportedly replied, "You might as well ask who owns the sun." Hassabis and his team seem to be operating from that exact same instinct. And here's something that makes the decision even more meaningful. John Jumper, the senior researcher who actually led the AlphaFold project day to day, has said publicly that the whole system was only possible because of decades of public scientific data shared freely by researchers before them. In other words, AlphaFold was built on open knowledge, so they paid it forward, in kind. And it wasn't only the predictions that were shared. DeepMind published the actual underlying code too, alongside their scientific paper, so other researchers could inspect it, build on it, and improve it themselves. Nothing hidden behind a corporate wall. The database itself kept getting woven deeper into the infrastructure of modern biology. It was integrated directly into other major public resources scientists already relied on daily, like UniProt and the Protein Data Bank in Europe. So a researcher could pull up a predicted structure right alongside the experimental data in the same search. The results of that decision are staggering. Today, the AlphaFold database is used by well over 3 million researchers in more than 190 countries around the world. Not just wealthy nations with billion-dollar labs, scientists in developing countries, universities with almost no funding, small research teams working on diseases that big pharmaceutical companies often ignore because they're not profitable enough to chase. For the first time in history, a scientist studying a rare tropical disease in a small lab has access to the exact same structural biology tools as a researcher inside a massive pharmaceutical company. That's not just a scientific breakthrough, that's a genuine act of leveling the playing field. Now let's talk about what all of this earned Demis Hassabis personally. In October 2024, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded for work on protein structures. Half of the prize went to David Baker, a biochemist at the University of Washington, for his work on designing entirely new proteins from scratch. The other half was awarded jointly to Demis Hassabis and John Jumper, specifically for predicting the structure of proteins. Read that again. A former child chess prodigy who spent his teenage years designing video games had just won one of the most prestigious scientific awards that exists, standing shoulder to shoulder with career biochemists who had spent their entire lives in the lab. The Nobel Committee didn't hedge their language either. They describe this as solving a problem that had puzzled scientists for 50 years. And here's a detail that almost feels too perfect to be real. That same year, 2024, the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to two other scientists, John Hopfield and Geoffrey Hinton, for foundational work on the neural networks that make modern AI possible in the first place. Think about what that means. In the same week, the same year, artificial intelligence research won a Nobel Prize in Physics and a Nobel Prize in Chemistry, two of the oldest, most prestigious scientific honors on the planet, both handed to people working on machine learning. That had never happened before in the history of the prize, not once. A few months later, Hassabis was knighted in the United Kingdom for his services to artificial intelligence. He's now formally known as Sir Demis Hassabis. And back at Google, his role kept growing too. In 2023, DeepMind merged with Google's other major AI research group, Google Brain, forming a single unit called Google DeepMind. Hassabis was named CEO of the combined organization, putting him in charge of one of the most influential artificial intelligence efforts on the entire planet. Chess prodigy, video game designer, neuroscientist, company founder, Nobel laureate, knighted by the crown, CEO of Google DeepMind. That's not a resume, that's practically a movie script. But here's the question that actually matters more than any award, any title, any Nobel medal sitting in a drawer somewhere. What did the rest of the world actually do once they had this tool in their hands? Because a database is only as valuable as the lives it touches. So let's leave the award ceremony behind for a moment and go look at the real world. Real diseases, real labs, real people whose lives may be already different because of what this technology unlocked. This is where the story stops being impressive and starts being personal.
Let's talk about malaria first, because this one still gives me chills. Malaria kills hundreds of thousands of people every single year, most of them children, mostly in some of the poorest regions on Earth. For years, a research team at the University of Oxford, led by Professor Matt Higgins, had been trying to fully understand a protein called PF4845. It sits on the surface of the malaria parasite, and it's one of the most promising targets for a vaccine that doesn't just treat malaria, but actually blocks its transmission entirely, stopping it from spreading from person to person. The problem was they only had a partial, blurry picture of its structure. Using AlphaFold combined with their own experimental data, Higgins and his team finally saw the complete picture. Higgins later told reporters that the technology was, in his words, transformational, giving them a razor-sharp view of a protein that had been stubbornly out of focus for years. That clarity directly enabled the design of new, improved vaccine candidates, and one of them had already completed its first phase of human clinical trials. Let that land for a second. A disease that has haunted humanity for centuries, and a piece of the solution came from an AI that learned to think by playing a board game. Now let's talk about something quieter, but honestly just as remarkable. At the University of Colorado Boulder, two researchers, Professor Marcelo Sousa and Professor Megan Mitchell, were studying the mechanisms behind antibiotic resistance. This is one of the scariest, most underappreciated threats in modern medicine. Bacteria that no longer respond to the drugs we depend on, quietly becoming superbugs. One particular bacterial protein structure, tied directly to how bacteria resist antibiotics, had eluded scientists for 10 years, a full decade of experiments, dead ends, and frustration. Sousa and Mitchell ran it through AlphaFold. It took about 30 minutes. 10 years compressed into 30 minutes. Sit with that. That's not an improvement. That's not faster. That's a different category of science altogether. Let's keep going, because this next one might be my personal favorite. Plastic pollution is one of the defining environmental problems of our time. Certain enzymes can actually break plastic down at a molecular level, but designing better, faster, cheaper versions of these enzymes requires knowing their exact structure. Google DeepMind partnered directly with the Center for Enzyme Innovation at the Center for Enzyme Innovation at the Portsmouth in the United Kingdom, using AlphaFold to map out the structures of more than 100 different enzymes involved in breaking down plastic waste. The goal is straightforward: engineer enzymes that are cheaper to produce, more stable, and faster acting to make large-scale plastic recycling actually viable instead of just theoretical.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, researchers at UCSF used AlphaFold to uncover previously unknown details about a key protein belonging to SARS-CoV-2, the virus behind COVID-19, directly supporting the development of new treatments for the disease that shut down the entire planet. And here's one more, because it shows AlphaFold isn't just helping us understand biology, it's actively helping design new medicine from scratch. A company called In Silico Medicine combined AlphaFold's predicted protein structures with their own AI drug discovery platform and used it to identify a completely new small molecule that inhibits a protein called CDK20, linked to hepatocellular carcinoma, one of the most common and deadly forms of liver cancer. This wasn't a lab confirming something scientists already suspected. This was AI-assisted structural biology being used to find, essentially from scratch, a promising new drug candidate for a target that had never successfully been drugged before. There's one more example worth mentioning because of sheer scale. An international team of scientists spanning multiple countries and institutions has been using AlphaFold to help map something called the nuclear pore complex. It's one of the largest, most intricate structures inside every single cell in your body, acting like a security checkpoint, controlling exactly what gets in and out of the cell's nucleus. Some of your DNA's most important instructions pass through it constantly. Mapping something that enormous and that complex purely through traditional experiments would have taken an almost unthinkable amount of time. With AlphaFold's predictions guiding the process, researchers built one of the most complete pictures of it that has ever existed. And it's not only about human disease either. Conservation researchers have used AlphaFold to study a protein tied to immune health in honeybees, a species quietly critical to the entire global food supply and struggling against collapse in colonies worldwide. Malaria, antibiotic resistance, plastic pollution, COVID-19, liver cancer, the literal architecture of your own cells, even the bees that pollinate your food. 5 completely unrelated fields, 3 different continents, all reaching for the exact same free, open database built by a company that started out teaching a computer to play video games. None of these researchers needed a special license or a grant just to see the shape of the protein they'd spent years studying. They just opened the database, and it was already there, waiting for them. That is what the most useful thing AI has ever done actually looks like in practice. Not a flashy demo, not a chatbot answering trivia. Quiet, steady, unglamorous progress in labs most of us will never hear about, chipping away at diseases that have haunted humanity for generations. If any part of this has genuinely surprised you, this is exactly the moment to hit like, subscribe, and follow along, because we cover stories like this, the ones that actually matter, every single day. Now here's the part that might be the most exciting of all, because this story isn't finished, not even close. What's happening with this technology right now in 2026 might end up being even bigger than everything we've just covered.
So, where is all of this heading right now? Because this story didn't stop with the Nobel Prize. If anything, it's accelerating. Back in 2024, DeepMind released AlphaFold 3, and it did something the earlier versions couldn't. The original AlphaFold was incredible at predicting the shape of a single protein. AlphaFold 3 went much further, predicting how proteins interact with DNA, with RNA, with other molecules entirely, essentially modeling the interactions of nearly all of life's molecules at once. Think of the first AlphaFold as learning to read individual letters. AlphaFold 3 learned to read entire sentences, capturing how different molecules talk to each other inside a living cell. And just like before, most of that capability was made available to researchers for free through something called the AlphaFold server. Around that same time, DeepMind also released a tool called AlphaMissense, designed to tackle a very different, deeply personal question. Out of the millions of tiny mutations that can occur in your genetic code, which ones are harmless, and which ones actually cause disease? AlphaMissense analyzed over 70 million possible genetic mutations and classified the overwhelming majority of them as likely harmless or likely disease-causing. For genetic counselors and researchers trying to understand rare inherited diseases, that's an enormous practical head start. Now here's where the story takes an interesting turn.
Remember Isomorphic Labs, the drug discovery company Hassabis founded back in 2021, built directly on top of AlphaFold's technology? In January 2024, Isomorphic signed major research partnerships with two pharmaceutical giants, Eli Lilly and Novartis. Combined value at nearly $3 billion. The goal was audacious: target diseases that have historically been considered undruggable, conditions where scientists understood the biology but could never quite design a molecule to treat it. For decades, some of these targets were considered essentially impossible. Isomorphic is betting that AI can search that impossible-seeming space faster than any human chemist ever could. Then in February of this year, Isomorphic dropped something that stunned the scientific community all over again. They unveiled a new system, informally nicknamed by outside experts as an AlphaFold 4, built specifically for drug design, capable of predicting how potential drugs bind to proteins and even modeling antibody structures at a level of accuracy well beyond AlphaFold 3. A computational biologist at Columbia University described it plainly as a major advance, comparable in scale to the jump from AlphaFold 2 to AlphaFold 3. But here's the twist, and it's worth sitting with for a second. Unlike AlphaFold 1, 2, and 3, this new system is not open. No public code, no shared weights, no published blueprint for other scientists to learn from. Just a technical report showing off the results without the recipe. The company that built its entire reputation on giving away one of biology's biggest secrets for free is now protecting its most advanced tool as a competitive commercial advantage. That shift hasn't gone unnoticed. Scientists building open alternatives have publicly pushed back on the idea that this new proprietary edge is unbeatable. One machine learning researcher who co-developed a competing open-source model said openly that plenty of gains are still possible using publicly available data, calling Isomorphic's new benchmark something the wider community should aim to match and eventually surpass. In other words, the same competitive spirit that once pushed a chess-playing algorithm to master an ancient board game in days, not years, is now playing out again in real time between open science and closed commercial labs, both racing towards the same goal. Meanwhile, almost as if answering that shift, the original open AlphaFold database kept right on growing anyway. Earlier this year, in a new collaboration between EMBL's European Bioinformatics Institute, Google DeepMind, the chipmaker NVIDIA, and Seoul National University, millions of entirely new predictions were added to the free public database, this time covering how two pairs of proteins physically join together inside a cell, called complexes. By May of this year, that update expanded again, adding tens of thousands of high-confidence predictions and millions more available for researchers to explore entirely free of charge to anyone on Earth with an internet connection. So here's where we actually stand today. One version of this technology remains completely open, feeding millions of researchers in over 190 countries, expanding every single month. Another version, sharper and more specialized, is now locked behind a corporate wall, racing towards the first truly AI-designed medicines in human history. Two paths, one origin story, both aimed in their own ways at the exact same target: understanding the machinery of life well enough to fix it when it breaks. And that brings us to the only question left worth asking.
Let's go back to where we started. A 4-year-old boy beating his own father at chess in a quiet house in London. That boy grew up chasing one single question in every possible direction he could find. Video games, neuroscience, board games, ancient rules on a wooden grid. What is a mind, and can we build one? He built a machine that learned Atari from nothing but pixels. Then a machine that beat a legend at Go, live, in front of 200 million people watching, with a move so strange it made that legend leave the room. At the time, most of the world treated that as the whole story, a cool trick, a machine that finally beat us at our own games. It wasn't the story, it was the training montage. Because the real target was never a board with black and white stones on it. It was a much older, much stranger board. The 20 amino acids that make up every protein in your body, folding themselves into shapes in milliseconds. Shapes that decide whether you get sick or stay healthy.
whether a drug works or does nothing at all. For 50 years, that board defeated some of the smartest people who ever lived. Nobel laureates, entire university departments, careers spent staring at one single molecule trying to guess its shape. And then a chess prodigy who once designed a theme park video game handed his creation the amino acid sequence of a protein and watched it do in minutes what had taken humanity half a century. Remember Levinthal's paradox from earlier? The idea that a protein trying every possible fold would take longer than the age of the universe? And yet somehow inside your own body right now, it happens correctly, instantly, without effort. In a strange way, that's exactly what happened here too. Humanity spent 50 years trying every possible approach to this problem, one careful experiment at a time. Then, almost instantly, by the standards of scientific history, the answer arrived. Here's what still gets me every time I think about it. They didn't sell it. 200 million protein structures handed to the entire planet for free. No login, no invoice, no fine print. A scientist in a small lab in a country most people couldn't find on a map, given the exact same tool as a lab with $1 billion budget. A 10-year mystery about antibiotic resistance gone in 30 minutes. A malaria vaccine moving toward human trials because a blurry picture finally came into focus. Enzymes being redesigned right now to quietly eat away at plastic sitting in the ocean. A cancer treatment built with meaningful help from artificial intelligence on track to enter human trials this very year. None of those researchers ever met Demis Hassabis. Most of them probably never will. And it didn't matter. The gift didn't require a relationship. It just required opening a database that was already sitting there, waiting. And yes, we just spent an entire section talking about how part of this story has now closed its doors, how the newest, sharpest version of this technology is sitting behind a corporate wall at Isomorphic labs, guarded like a trade secret. Maybe that bothers you a little. Honestly, it probably should, at least a little. But notice what didn't disappear. The original database, the one with 200 million structures, the one growing every single month with new complexes, new organisms, new pieces of the puzzle, still free, still open, still sitting there for anyone with an internet connection and a question worth asking. Whatever happens next with the commercial side of this story, that foundation already did its job. It already reached 3 million researchers in 190 countries, most of whom will never make headlines, never win an award, never get interviewed by a journalist. That's the part of the story I think we skip past too quickly, in a world obsessed with AI that talks back to us, that writes our emails, that generates images in seconds. The most useful thing artificial intelligence has ever done wasn't loud. It didn't go viral for being clever in a chat window. It sat quietly inside research labs on every continent, giving thousands of scientists a tool that let them stop guessing and start knowing. A Nobel Prize followed, a knighthood followed, a CEO title followed. Worth remembering, too, that Hassabis didn't stand on that stage alone. John Jumper, the researcher who spent years actually building the system line by line, stood right there with him. And David Baker, on the other side of the same prize, spent his career learning to design entirely new proteins that had never existed in nature before. Two different paths, reading and writing the same language of life, honored on the same night. But none of those titles were the point either. They were just the world catching up to what had already happened in a quiet office in London. Somewhere right now, tonight, while you're watching this, there is almost certainly a researcher somewhere on this planet, in a small university you've never heard of, opening that free database, looking at the shape of a protein tied to a disease that has a name you might recognize, maybe one that's touched your own family, maybe one that will, someday, touch someone in yours who hasn't even been born yet. They didn't need permission. They didn't need funding they don't have. They just needed the door to be open. It was. And it still is, right now, while you're hearing this. A game-playing algorithm didn't just learn to win, it learned to give. If this video showed you something you didn't expect to feel today, don't just scroll past it. Follow this channel and send this video to 5 people who'd actually sit with this the way you just did. Not 5 random people, 5 who'd care. And I want to hear from you directly. Leave a real comment, not great video. Tell me honestly what part of this actually landed for you, the part that made you stop for a second. And tell me what you want us to dig into next, because this story, the one where artificial intelligence quietly changes what's possible for human beings, has barely even started. We'll be here, telling the next part of it tomorrow.